Captain Jayla paced back and forth in the canteen, taking long, slow breaths. This was by far the single most terrifying moment of his entire career. Pirates, black holes, supernovae, and electrified Lagrange clouds were simple compared to what he was about to do. The thuds of heavy footsteps made him stop and take a deep breath, smoothing out his captain's uniform as the sounds of muffled voices grew close. Then the door opened. Security Chief Tor Guddle ducked under the doorframe. Followed closely the laughing chief engineer, Sam, who punched the 3.5-meter-tall Kepler in his massive thigh. A punch, he knew, that had enough force to cave in most sapient species' skulls. He'd seen it on more than one occasion. "Sup, Cap," Sam said, leaning against Tor Godal's tree-trunk thick leg. "You summoned us," Tor Godal said. Jayla took a deep breath and swallowed. His blue skin paling and going mottled at the reality of the situation took hold. The pair had just been life-partnered in a blending of human and Kepler traditions. The ensuing festivities left the entire crew hungover for 3 days. As their wedding present, Jayla had offered to take them to a port of their choice for a 14-rotation shore leave to celebrate what Sam called a honeymoon, and for Tor Godal to perform his people's rites before their union was finalized. "Have a seat," Jayla said, gesturing to the pair before taking a seat himself on the opposite end of a table to put as much distance between himself and the Hell-worlders. Sam shrugged and grabbed a chair, Tor Godal tossing. Down his disc that expanded into his cylindrical seat, Jayla stammered, swallowing nervously. "I have some bad news." Both Sam and Tor Godal tilted their heads in confusion. "You okay, Cap?" Sam asked. "How may we assist you?" Tor Godal added. Jayla fought the urge to evacuate all 3 of his bowels. "We received a communication from the Federal Fleet. Command. There's a crisis on Tonari 6. The Unavar have launched a slave harvest on the colonies there," he said grimly. "Fucking Unavar," Sam growled. "It gets more complicated," Jayla said, all 6 eyes looking down at the table. Tor Godal took a deep breath that seemed to suck the atmosphere out of the room. Sam looked up at him as he looked down at them, and then realization dawned in their eyes. "No," Sam said, shaking their head. No, they didn't." Jayla nodded, 3 of his eyes wincing as he prepared. "They invoked Article 10. We're to report to the front immediately to assist with the evacuation. We're one of the few super hauler-class vessels close enough that can take on passengers," Jayla said. Tor Godal let his head droop as Sam leapt to their feet. "God. Damn cock-blocking, bug-eyed, slaving sons of Artelian whores," Sam screamed, throwing their chair across the room. The tirade of expletives lasted a moment longer before Tor Godal slowly reached over, gently placing a hand on Sam's head, and the human immediately calming and taking their first breath since leaping up. A few deep, ragged, deep breaths later, Sam turned to stand and lean against Tor Godal's flank. "Dimension skip is ordered for 800 hours, Jayla said, his first bowel having evacuated at Sam's outburst. "Sam, I need the Kiga to make record time. Tor Godal, I need security briefed and ready to deploy as a defense force for our carriers under Federal Fighter S." Sam snapped upright. Jayla's second bowel evacuated as Sam cut him off. "I'm with Tor," they snapped, making both look at them. "Sam, I need you on board to..." Jayla started before getting cut off again. "With all due respect, Cap, Yotha can handle the drive core during the evacuation." "I am not," Sam snarled, leaning across the table. "I am not leaving my mate to go into combat without me. If you force me, I will literally tear apart every carrier on this scrap heap." A massive hand gently rested and caressed Sam's back. "My heart, your..." Tor Godal began before Sam whipped around. "Mated pairs fight and die together," Sam yelled. "That's your own people's rule." Tears began streaming down the human's face as they ran their hands over their close-cropped hair in frustration and began pacing around. "Besides," they said, "I haven't gotten laid in over 4 damn years. If I'm not going to get my honeymoon, I'm going to take my frustration out on those crab-looking slaver sons of bitches. Or do you want your chief engineer cranky, sexually frustrated, worried about their mate and unable to focus but absolutely willing to eject an overclocked Class Emmy drive core directly into a Unavar slaver fleet out of sheer goddamn spite?" Tor Godal and Jayla glanced at each other, Tor Godal just shrugging. "Fine," Jyla sighed. You and Torgodal will be the last... First, Sam snapped. First carrier down, Jyla said. Just a quick reminder before we get started, only 4% of my viewers have subscribed to the channel so far. If you enjoy the content, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to hit that subscribe button and support the channel. Thank you so much. Now continue amazing story, Sam nodded, grabbing the top of Torgodal's cuirass and pulling him down and kissing him hard. I'll prep the Kiga. You get your armor, Sam said, putting their forehead to his. Looks like you get to see your wedding present early. If anyone had been tracking it, they'd see the Kiga had broken a galactic record for how fast it arrived. The superhauler, as large as most federal carriers, tearing out of subdimensional space at flank speed, blazing past the federal rearguard and steaming towards the front and its appointed escort ships. Sam had pushed the drive core harder than it ever had been before, and the massive superhauler moved like it owned the entire engagement. The superhaulers launched its container carriers, nearly corvettes in size, to drag the massive containers from orbital and surface stations up to the Kiga. The 5 container carriers separated from the superhauler, forming up with squadrons of fighters and dropships, and made the descent into the atmosphere. The carriers made landfall alongside the dropships, loading ramps dropping from the carriers as federal troops stormed out of their own craft. Fighters screamed as they engaged, overhead to provide cover. As the personnel ramp dropped from one carrier, the towering Kepler descended in traditional battle armor, followed closely by his human mate clad in nearly identical armor made to fit them, and each set emblazoned with the Kepler glyph for mated pair on their shoulders. Both Hellworlders were armed with assault rifles from the ship's security armory, Torgodal sporting a Kepler warglaive on his back, Sam with one of their makeshift shields on their back and an improvised mace jammed into their belt. Prophets shield you, Torgodal said down to Sam. Give 'em hell, babe, Sam said. The pair donned their matching helmets, cocked their weapons, and waited. It wasn't long before the fleeing refugees crested a nearby rise, a tide of desperate and terrified people. Stun rounds and shock nets began flying over the wall of fleeing refugees, and the 2 Hellworlders nodded to each other. Inside! Get inside! Sam shouted through their helmet speaker. Move! Move! Torgodal followed, his own bellow hardly needing the helmet's amplifying speaker. The pair of Hellworlders waved the terrified people into the open container as the security teams of 3 to 5 on the other carriers did the same. Refugees poured into the containers by the hundreds as the sounds of combat grew louder and closer. The security teams could see federal pulse rounds crossing Univar shock blasts in the air. Sam and Torgodal looked at each other over the crowd, the panicked people not even noticing the pair of Hellworlders. They're going to get here before we're loaded, Torgodal said over the comms. Carrier 4 is already engaged, a security officer said over the comms. Contact! Contact! Carrier 2 is engaging! Firing point defense! Prepare for close quarters! Another yelled. Babe! Sam yelled, pointing to the rise, and the first of the pursuing slavers skittered to the top of the rise. Neither hesitated, both shouldering their weapons and opening fire as the ship's point defense cannons began to rake the rise with fire. More came. And more. The Univar had the mentality of bodies over bullets, and their slaver invasions could number in the billions. The horde skittered forward, having broken the lines of the federal troops and closing in on the refugees. The 2 armored mates steadily walked forward, guns blazing and refugees flowing between them and into the container. Tor, Sam said over the comms. Fall back. Protect the ramp. I'm on point. Are you insane? There's too many for even. You to hold, Torgodal roared over the noise. You can block the ramp if they get past me, chitin brain. I can't. The pair looked at one another, and Torgodal knew Sam was right. His massive form took up nearly the entire loading ramp, and if the worst came, he could physical hold back the Univar from getting into the container until the ramp could close, where Sam and the refugees would be completely overrun. Some honeymoon. Huh, Sam laughed hollowly. Become a demon, my beloved, Torgodal said with a nod. Become a demon, Sam said, then broke into a rich laugh. Pookie, they're going to wish they were just dealing with a demon. Torgodal began to fall back towards the ship with the refugees, looking back over his shoulder as Sam continued to advance towards the closing horde. Come back to me, Nurgle Kit, Torgodal said over the comms. Sam reloaded their rifle in a beat, continuing to fire into the mass of skittering crab-like slavers, growling to theirself as the first Unavar came into melee range. The human kicked it so hard its shell caved in, then spun to fire into another. Closing group. 2 flanked them, Sam turning and bludgeoning them with their rifle before firing point blank. Another leapt at them, Sam grabbing their mace and hitting the airborne crustacean so hard it cracked and split in half, its liquid inside spilling all over Sam. Their other arm swung their shield off their back. I just wanted to be naked. On a fucking beach, Sam roared, mace swinging and crushing shells, bashing with their shield and bringing the edge down on fallen slavers. And you bastards ruined everything! Torgodal watched from the ramp as the final wave of refugees stormed in, his heart's pounding from battle lust and the sight of his life mate roaring in combat, unafraid and perfect. There was no Kepler that could match his Sam, no god from his pantheon, no demon from their underworld. He'd been blessed by being chosen by the very avatar of war itself. But that avatar was mortal, and he saw them falter. A claw pierced Sam's side, another tore at the back of their knee. Time and the battle began to slow down. Sam collapsed to one knee, still swinging and causing fonts of organ fluid and shards of carapace to spray over the encircling horde. A chitinous pincer caught Sam across the faceplate, their helmets spinning off as the Unavar hoisted them up by the neck. Torgodal slammed the button to close the container ramp as the final refugees boarded. The last thing Sam heard before darkness overtook them was a Kepler battle roar, louder than the chattering Unavar all around them and the screaming cannons of the ship. Sam woke gagging. There was something down their throat. The light was blinding. There was pain. They felt hands on them trying to hold them down. They fought, but something was restraining their arms. They thrashed, tried to scream, to call out, but the thing down their throat choked off the noise. Then something big was on their chest, heavy and warm and familiar. Another stroked their short hair. Calm down, Nurgle. Sam stilled. Spindly, narrow fingers pulled tape from their cheeks before gently removing the intubation tube from their throat, another set of slight hands rolling them onto their side to throw up in a pan. Tor, Sam asked hoarsely. They are stable. 3 voices said at once. Give us the room, Torgodal said. Sam's vision was returning slowly, going from blinded white to blurred colors, as though they could make out the fuzzy shapes of the Senekai triplets leaving the ward. Torgodal's massive hand eased Sam onto their back again, stroking their short hair as they coughed from their ragged throat. We are famous now, the Kepler said softly. Hellworlders halt Unavar advance on refugee evacuation. It's on all the news feeds. Sam smiled weakly, reaching up to run their hand over Torgodal's blurry face, then looked down, noticing the hospital gown they were clad in, and groaned. They shifted with a wince, pulling the bed sheet over their self and sighing. Torgodal's hand just kept stroking their hair softly and soothingly. No one saw, their mate said. Only me and the triplets, and you know how seriously Senekai take their vows of confidence. Not even the captain was permitted to see you. Thanks, Sam said with a weak smile. You're the best, Pookie Bear. I spoke to my people while you slept, Torgodal said softly. After seeing the vids of you and I on Tonari Sick, they consider the mating rites fulfilled. Sam's head turned towards Torgodal slowly, noting the Kepler wasn't wearing his usual cuirass and body armor, but loose-fitting tunic and linen-like robes, the sign of a Kepler who was properly mated. We swore oaths during the ceremony. You requested, he said. We shed blood together. The elders decided a battlefield was an acceptable substitute for a hunt, and one proved they were willing to sacrifice their self for the other. Sam's eyes began to well up, weakly rubbing the tears from their eyes and forcing a laugh to try and diffuse their own emotions. Ass, they said, weakly batting at Torgodal's massive shoulder as he lay on the floor beside their bed. I just woke up from a coma or something, and now you're making me cry. Sam's eyes suddenly went wide as they realized something, wincing as they turned onto their side as quickly as they could to face Torgodal, grabbing onto the Kepler's shoulder with a weak, trembling hand. Tor, does that mean we can finally... Sam started, nodding their head slightly. Kepler were incapable of blushing, but the vocalized churl they made when embarrassed rumbled from Torgodal's throat. We may physically consummate. We are seen as equals among my people. Sam's hands scrambled, pulling at wires, IVs, and flinging the sheet and their hospital gown off as they scrambled, naked, off the bed flopping atop Tor Goddel with a wince and a laugh. They pressed their lips to their mates, kissing them hard and deep, hands already scrambling to untie the wrapped tunic over his torso. Sam, Tor Goddel chuckled. Sam, you need rest. Sam sat up on top of the Kepler, their legs spread wide to straddle their mate, who was almost 2.5 times as wide as they were. Tor Goddel, I just nearly got killed by an all-you-can-eat crab boil, they said sternly. I want to feel alive. Not in combat, not in crisis, but with the man I love more than anyone or anything in this galaxy. I need this. I need you. From his back, Tor Goddel looked up at the naked human atop him. His war avatar. His mate. They were battered and bruised. The regenerative tissue replacements in their side and their leg were still red and raw, but there was something in their eyes that the Kepler had never seen. A weakness, a desire, and it was all directed at him. He swore one of his hearts would fail if they kept looking at him like that. Gently then, he purred. It's my first time, so you'll have to help. Outside the isolation ward door, the Senekai triplets stood guard. The three stood motionless and silent as the muffled sounds of laughter, then moans, the clattering of falling equipment followed by more laughter and moans came from the other side of the door. The infirmary door slid open, Captain Jayla entering to check on the other wounded refugees and security officers before heading towards the triplets. How is Chief Engineer Martinez Godal? Captain Jayla asked. Another clamor of falling equipment, as what sounded like Sam's voice crying out passionately from the other side of the door. The three Senekai all looked at the captain with blank faces, as if they hadn't heard a thing. They are convalescing faster than expected, the triplets said together in a flat monotone. The captain nodded as the noises from the other side of the door continued, leaning over to look at the door as one of the triplets also leaned to block his view. I see, the captain said slowly. And have you seen Tor Goddal? The three nodded. He is assisting with the chief engineer's rehabilitation regimen, the first triplet said. It is quite intense, the second said. We anticipate this particular exercise to last at least an hour, the third said. The captain nodded slowly, the commotion beyond the door continuing, Jayla refocusing on the triplets in front of him. Very well, keep me informed when the chief engineer is ready to return to duty. And please let the security chief know I need him for a command staff meeting at 1100 hours, the captain said, before turning to head out of the infirmary. We will, Captain, the third triplet said. We advise delaying your meeting until 12:30 hours, the second said. Chief Engineer Martinez Godal seems rather focused on their rehabilitation, the first said. Captain Jayla just groaned, pinching the bridge of his nose and exited the infirmary. Fucking hell-worlders, he muttered. Enjoy next amazing story. The crew of the superhauler Kiga was on edge. It had been a month since the pirate attack had nearly crippled the ship and decimated the crew. Most had worked double or triple shifts to get the Kiga to limp back to port to deliver their cargo and undergo repairs. Now, after roughly 2 weeks in port, the captain had posted the new duty rosters with the fresh crew he'd hired to replace those lost in the attack. The new crew was fairly standard. Several Gathak for ship's maintenance since they were small enough to easily fit into the tight wireways and vent systems, a set of bonded Senekai triplets for the infirmary since they can work seamlessly with one another through their innate psychic bond, a few Orionids for bridge crew. The problem was with the new security chief, a hulking Kepler warcast named Tor Goddal. Kepler were hell-worlders, stronger, faster, and more resilient than virtually any other species. Kepler were feared throughout the known systems. You never, ever had more than one Kepler on a crew because of the species' fiercely territorial and violently competitive natures. Having more than one Kepler on a crew was a surefire way to witness a pair of 3.5-meter tall beasts end up in a brawl that could tear apart ship corridors and end up with an infirmary full of wounded. Thankfully, Tor Goddal was the only Kepler on the crew, but not the only hellworlder. There was also Sam. Sam had been the de facto chief engineer for weeks after the previous chief had suffered severe plasma burns during a fuel leak and been confined to the ship's trauma center. When the pirates stormed the ship and began overwhelming the security teams, Sam had held the door to the ship's drive core and primary electrical network with nothing but a panel of drive shielding they'd torn off and strapped it to their arm, a sidearm with 25 ceramic slugs, and a pipe with a spare drive gear on the end of it. When a grenade got past them and killed 2 other engineers, Sam flew into a rage and left a bloody trail of dead or broken pirates from the door of the drive core and up 3 decks. Sam's rampage stopped when a lucky force grenade managed to knock them out, but not before having taken 6 ceramic rounds, having their clavicle shattered, left arm broken in 2 places as well as all the ribs on the right side of their chest. It had been enough to kill nearly any species, but not a human. One thing was certain. When Torgadal found out what Sam had done, he'd almost certainly see them as a challenge, and that wouldn't end well for anyone. It took 3 weeks. Then one of the bridge crew got drunk on sulfur wine in the officers' mess and started going on about Sam's rampage during the attack. Could have been considered a war crime if the crew hadn't kept it quiet. The next day, Torgadal entered engineering in a quiet stalk uncharacteristic for a 3.5-meter-tall walking tank. Sam was on their back underneath the drive core. Torgadal could have just stepped and crushed Sam's lower torso beneath a tree stump thick foot, but Kepler ethics would never allow for that. "You are engineer, Sam," Torgadal said. Sam didn't bother coming out from under the drive core, the clatter of their work continuing without pause. "Chief engineer," Sam said from beneath the machinery. "I am Torgadal," the Titan said. "New chief of security, cool. Look, I got my hands full right now. Unless you want every corridor of this ship to be full of drive plasma the next time we dimension skip, I suggest you let me work. Meet me in the canteen in an hour and I'll buy you a drink." Torgadal stared down at the tiny form at his feet, with cold, predatory eyes. "You are very brave or very stupid," Torgadal said. "I'm resorting to repairing a Class Amynth fusion drive core plasma exchange pump with duct tape and chewing gum right now, so a bit of both," Sam said. "Canteen, 1 hour." "I accept," Torgadal said. The massive Kepler turned to leave. 6 security officers with stun weapons were at the engineering room door. Behind them was the entire engineering crew, half of maintenance, 4 bridge officers, and Senekai triplets carrying medkits. All breathed a sigh of relief and parted, as the massive security chief exited the engineering bay, then turned towards Sam, who was sliding out from under the drive core. The assembled crew stared in equal parts shocked and terrified silence. "What?" Sam asked, staring back at the odd faces. 58 minutes later, Torgadal entered the canteen. A single figure stood at the ship's bar. They were 1.7 meters tall, lean, and muscular. Their hair was cropped short, and the standard engineer's jumpsuit was half unzipped and tied about their waist by the arms. A skin-tight garment was on their upper torso that ended just below the ribcage, the garment few shades darker than their own natural skin. "Did some research. On the way over," Sam said, turning around with a bottle in one hand, a glass, and massive stein in the other. "Your species can drink ethanol too, right?" Torgadal had to physically resist the urge to do a double take. "Yes," the Kepler rumbled. "I was unaware other species were capable." Sam laughed loud and unafraid. "Bitch, I drank my sergeant and company commander under the table back in the Marines," Sam said, sitting down and sliding the massive stein towards Torgadal. Torgadal reached into a pouch at his waist and tossed a flat disc onto the floor, the disc expanding to a wide cylinder that the Kepler could sit on. Sam grinned, leaning across the table and uncorking the bottle and beginning to generously pour into the stein first. Torgadal sniffed and then snorted at the clear liquid as it flowed freely into the stein. "Prophet Stones, is that Kepler pure grain?" "Everclear," Sam said with a grin. 190 proof, which comes out to 95% ethanol? Torgadal tilted his massive head at the tiny being before him. They couldn't be more than 55 kilograms soaking wet with weights on their feet, but they were pouring one of the strongest ethanol drinks on his own homeworld. In comparison, Sam's glass was equal to his own, and they poured just as liberally. "Marines? That is a form of your species' military?" Sam nodded, taking the first drink. 4 standard rotations of service. Deployed in the Gethak sector during the Dothkol corporate wars, Sam said. Torgodal nodded, taking a drink from his own stein. I am Warcast, he said with a hint of pride. I also saw combat during the corporate war. Torgodal nodded to a rather substantial scar on the carapace on his left shoulder. Infantry railgun round, he said. Sam raised an eyebrow, then smirked. They stood up and put their foot on the table, rolling up their pant leg to reveal an equally severe scar on their inner thigh. Kethek phase mine, they said, then nodded to another scar on Tolgodal's face. The Kepler reached up, touching. The scar, snorting in amusement. I was a cub. Our family's domesticated Nurgle was aggressive, Torgodal said, causing Sam to tilt their head in confusion and making the Kepler laugh. A Nurgle is a small, by Kepler standards, domesticated animal descended from large jungle predators, he said. So a cat, they asked. You got clawed by a fucking cat? Torgodal shrugged, taking another drink. I got you beat, Sam said, taking a drink and slamming their glass down on the table. They stood up, lifting part of the tight garment on their chest to reveal a series of lightning bolt-like scars. Beneath, there's an aquatic predator on my homeworld. We call it a manowar. It's a semi-sentient, gelatinous piece of crap with long, stinging tentacles that floats around and just eats whatever float into its tentacles, which are super painful. I was probably like 7 rotations old, swimming in the ocean, and didn't see it. Damn thing nearly killed me. Torgodal nodded, then unbuckled the massive cuirass over his chest to reveal a multitude of puckered scars. Small arms fire. Assault cannon, automatic high-energy repeater, he said, gesturing to groups of scars. Artillery shell, Sam countered with another scar of their own. Hours later, the crew were lingering in the doorways, watching in amazement as the two DEATHWORLDers sat among several discarded bottles, singing old battle songs and laughing. It was the polar opposite of the bloodbath everyone had expected. Most couldn't comprehend what they were seeing. An hour after that, Sam and Torgodal parted ways, each stumbling their way to their respective quarters. As Torgodal landed on his bunk with a massive thud, he looked up at the screen above his bed. Cortex, he slurred. Display Terran courtship rituals. 2 years later, the Raider leader slammed her pistol into the side of Torgodal's head, sending him toppling to the floor and spitting iridescent blood. The gangly Artrean leaning over the hog-tied Kepler and pressing her pistol to Torgodal's head. The Kiga had been taken by surprise, responding to an SOS from a civilian transport vessel. Before the security teams could even arm themselves, the Artreans were storming the corridors and pumping stun rounds into anything that moved. It had taken 3 dozen to bring Torgodal down, but catching him on the way from the ship showers had been rather fortuitous. The codes for engineering, the Raider chittered. What are they? 17 Gamma Epsilon, fornicate your matriarch. Torgodal spat, laughing after the Raider hit him again. The codes, enjoy next story. The Yandari Death Squad was holding the rise, bolts of electrostatic, charges popping gangly hot soldiers like water balloons, a few ripping those unlucky enough to get within arm's reach limb from limb, and then a splash of gore, viscera spraying. The dropship that had flattened the Death Squad dropping assault ramps as bipedal armored soldiers poured out without hesitation. Slug throwers barked and flashed, one carrying a plasma thrower charging to the rim of a trench and setting it and its inhabitants ablaze with the power of a star. An armored figure raised a sword, the blade vibrating so fast it distorted the air around it. Attack! The figure cried in a modulated voice. 13. There were only 13 of them, and in less than 30 ticks had killed more than 4 times their number. It was a massacre, like watching gods descend upon a battle. The record drone tracks, one armored figure as it cut a bloody swathe through the Yandari lines, slug thrower blazing before running out of ammo, and the figure switching to a sidearm and combat knife. The change in weaponry didn't hamper the living god, it only made things bloodier and more personal, as the Fallen got to look into the glowing optics of their killer. A Yandari gets a lucky shot, blowing a chunk out of the figure's midsection as it guts another Yandari. The cold green optics turn to look at the offender, the pistol in its hand blowing a hole through the head of its gutted victim without even looking as it advances on its new prey. A second shot deflects off its armor, leaving it glowing with heat. A third shot goes wide. A fourth, the figure raises its sidearm and aims. A fifth, panicked shot clips its armored helm and spins it. "Pause, replay," a voice says as the recording freezes, groans and cries of protest coming from the shadows. "What are we seeing?" the voice says, a spotlight shining down to show the small form of the educator standing under the massive vid screen. "Anyone?" A green light flashed in the dark of the audience. "Speak," the educator said. "Shock assault," a mechanical translator voice droned over the clicks and chitters of one of the insectoid students. "Bipedal species, likely mammalian based on morphology. Ability to ignore catastrophic bodily damage indicates the use of combat stims and pain blockers. Assessment, Tolvara Security Forces, Gethek Kill Team, Hollandara Regulars, or Jaka Freebooters." "The Ba," educator nodded. "Astute, Cadet 5583, the educator says. "Tell me the commonality between your assessed combatants." There was a low drone from the dark before the mechanical voice spoke again over the clicking. "All aforementioned species employ the use of combat drugs to enhance combatant efficacy. The lack of powered armor narrows the range, Father. The combatants are employing kinetic weapons rather than energy-based ones, further narrowing the candidates to the aforementioned list." The educator nodded again. "You're neglecting a factor into your assessment, 5583, the educator says, pacing beneath the screen, frozen at the armored figure in mid-spin from the weapon impact. "There is a bias in your calculation. Reassess." There was a longer drone before a different green light flashed. Cadet 5583 assumed the combatants were all male, based off the species they listed, a voice from the shadow said. The educator snapped his fingers. "Artrean." Heads snapped up as a commotion could be heard from the corridors outside the canteen, weapon fire and screams echoing from beyond the bulkhead door. "What is that?" the raider leader demanded. Torgodal just kept laughing, the raider slamming the gun to his head again before firing a shot into his leg, making him cry out. "What is that?" the raider screamed into the Kepler's face. "My mate!" The bulkhead doors blew open, a shadow charging in as Artrean bodies were still airborne from the explosion. A massive cudgel swung, crushing chests, breaking limbs, caving in skulls. Within seconds, the shadow had the raid leader by the neck and squeezed. The Artrean wheezed and squeaked, legs kicking in the air as she fought to try and free herself. "Mercy," she choked. Sam's face leaned in close. "You shot my Pookie." "Bear!" they snarled, hand twisting sharply and snapping the Artrean's neck before dropping the lifeless body to the ground. From the floor, Torgodal chuckled. "I have never been so aroused," he said as Sam knelt down, cutting his binding. "Bed me." "Later," Sam said, kissing him hard with their fingers grabbing his mane. "There's still a dozen of them in command. You good to go?" Torgodal rose with a wince, grabbing 2 stun rifles and slinging them over his shoulders as Sam tossed him a makeshift spear. "Let's show them what mated Hellworlders can do," he said. "Gods and prophets save them," Sam purred as the pair stalked towards the bridge. "Enjoy next amazing story." The Yandere Death Squad was holding the rise, bolts of electrostatic. Charges popping gangly Hotch soldiers like water balloons, a few ripping those unlucky enough to get within arm's reach limb from limb, and then a splash of gore, viscera spraying, the dropship that had flattened the death squad dropping assault ramps as bipedal armored soldiers poured out without hesitation. Slug throwers barked and flashed, one carrying a plasma thrower charging to the rim of a trench and setting it and its inhabitants ablaze with the power of a star. An armored figure raised a sword, the blade vibrating so fast it distorted the air around it. "Attack!" the figure cried in a modulated voice. 13. There were only 13 of them, and in less than 30 ticks had killed more than 4 times their number. It was a massacre, like watching gods descend upon a battle. The record drone tracks. One armored figure as it cut a bloody swathe through the Yandere lines, slug thrower blazing before running out of ammo, and the figure switching to a sidearm and combat knife. The change in weaponry didn't hamper the living god, it only made things bloodier and more personal as the Fallen got to look into the glowing optics of their killer. A Yandere gets a lucky shot, blowing a chunk out of the figure's midsection as it guts another Yandere. The cold green optics turn to look at the offender, the pistol in its hand blowing a hole through the head of its gutted victim without even looking as it advances on its new prey. A second shot deflects off its armor, leaving it glowing with heat. A third shot goes wide. A fourth. The figure raises its sidearm and aims. A fifth panicked shot clips its armored helm and spins it. Pause replay, a voice says as the recording freezes, groans and cries of protest coming from the shadows. What are we seeing? The voice says, a spotlight shining down to show the small form of the educator standing under the massive vid screen. Anyone? A green light flashed in the dark of the audience. Speak, the educator said. Shock assault, a mechanical translator voice droned over the clicks and chitters of one of the insectoid students. Bipedal species, likely mammalian based on morphology. Ability to ignore catastrophic bodily damage indicates the use of combat stims and pain blockers. Assessment, Tolvara Security Forces, Gethek Kill Team, Hollandara Regulars or Jaka Freebooters. These suck. Educator nodded. Astute Cadet 5583, the educator says. Tell me the commonality between your assessed combatants. There was a low drone from the dark before the mechanical voice spoke again over the clicking. All aforementioned species employ the use of combat drugs to enhance combatant efficacy. The lack of powered armor narrows the range further. The combatants are employing kinetic weapons rather than energy-based ones, further narrowing the candidates to the aforementioned list. The educator nodded again. You're neglecting a factor into your assessment, 5583, the educator says, pacing beneath the screen, frozen at the armored figure in mid-spin from the weapon impact. There is a bias in your calculation. Reassess. There was a longer drone before a different green light flashed. Cadet 5583 assumed the combatants were all male, based off the species they listed, a voice from the shadow said. The educator snapped his fingers and pointed into the dark. Very good, he said, before gesturing up to the screen and the lights dimming again. The recording resumed, the armored figure's head snapping back and its helm flying off. A tanned, narrow face with full lips and dark short hair snarled, grabbing the Yandere and lifting it up by the chest armor, the wound on the warrior's face still smoldering on their high cheekbone along with their midsection as they stabbed the Yandere repeatedly through the side of the neck. A female, the educator said, the video pausing just after the figure drops their kill, face covered in blood and still smoldering. 5583, assess. Human female, Terran drop Marines. Based on insignia and combat protocol, most likely 6th Marine Raiders, the translator droned. A laugh erupted from another part of the shadows. Something funny? The educator asked, just before another green light flicked on. Females aren't capable of such things, a voice rumbled beneath the translator. I came here to learn, not be shown fiction, the shadows murmured. Cadet Gaval, correct? The educator asked. Yes, the voice rumbled. The educator smiled as he paced beneath the image. Cadet, your species is still new to the Union, so I'll ignore your ignorance for the time being in favor of making this a teachable moment. The educator looked into the shadows. Cadet Carter, would you oblige us? The educator asked to the shadows. Yes, sir, came a soft voice as the sound of feet rapidly stomping on the ground began to echo. A moment later, a second spotlight illuminated the form of a young human woman. Not even 2 meters tall, dark-skinned, and curly-haired, she was easily one of the smallest cadets in the class. She stood at attention as the rumbling laughter erupted again. You expect me to believe that is capable of what you just showed us? Gaval growled from the shadow. Why don't you fuck around and find out? Carter said, eyes locked on the candidate's green light, making the class stomp faster and louder. That is a Terran combat challenge, the educator said. It's my understanding your people can't refuse one. Isn't that right, Cadet Gaval? Steps thumped against the stairs as the reptilian centaur-like Gaval descended before being highlighted by his own spotlight. Damn, Carter laughed. Looks like your species feeds their bitches Wheaties. There wasn't even a chance for the instructor to speak before Gaval swung, catching Carter with a fist as big as her head and sending her spinning into the dark as the room went. Quiet. A female will never equal a male, Gaval said triumphantly. And then the laughing started from the dark. The lights turned on, showing Carter already hefting her to her feet and wiping blood from her mouth and eyebrows. Now I'm gonna enjoy beating your ass, she said before cocking her head curiously. By the way, is it on the back end or that fucking thing you keep talking out of? Gaval roared and charged, Carter calmly rolling her neck and shoulders to crack the bones. And then the beating began. It happened so fast it was hard for anyone to track, the massive Gaval galloping towards Carter and swinging his anvil-sized fist at her again. Suddenly, she wasn't being thrown by it. She was clinging to it, arms and legs wrapped around the wrist as wide as her own torso. Gaval recoiled, shaking his arm. Carter scrambled up his arm and onto his shoulders, wrapping her legs around, his neck as she started punching into the side of Gaval's neck. As you can see, the educator spoke as the brawl went on. The human female woman, Carter snarled as Gaval grabbed her and she kicked at his chin and throat. Apologies, the educator said calmly. Take note of this class, human, and forgive me this cadet Carter. Females abhor being called females. They prefer their species designation of Womon, and to not use that is to take your own life in your hands. Gaval slammed Carter to the ground in a ham-fisted bomb, knocking the wind from her to buy himself a second to rub and bat at the numerous bruises and bleeding wounds at his neck and shoulders. Human women are more nimble than their male counterparts, the educator said as Carter hopped up, spit blood and charged the ailing Gaval. They have a higher pain tolerance. Their physiology allows for greater dexterous combat over males, which favor endurance and strength. Carter leaped, her feet driving into Gaval's throat before grabbing his arm and using it to flip her falling form onto his back in a smooth, almost effortless motion, her boots slamming down into the point where Gaval's upright torso met his centaur-like back half and dropping the massive cadet to the floor. Allow this to be a lesson, the educator said, as Carter wrenched Gaval's arm sideways and stepped on the gills on his forehead. Never allow the assumption of a combatant sex be a determining factor in your combat projections. Submit, Carter growled, pushing her foot down on Gaval's gills and pulling his arm back. Never. To, female, Gaval croaked. Cadet Carter will kill Cadet Gaval in exactly 44.68 seconds, the translator droned. I am aware, 5583, the educator said. Carter wrenched harder. She could feel things tearing and, popping in Gaval's arm as she pressed her foot down hard on his gills. Submit! The massive form of Gaval growled and choked. Then something snapped. His arm in Carter's hands went limp, and Gaval let out a yowl. Without pause, Carter flipped the yowling Gaval over and wrenched at the opposite arm, planting her boot on, his gills again. You're running out of limbs and the educator isn't going to save you, she says, her voice soft. Submit! Tap out! Surrender! A moment later, as the tearing sounds began again, Gaval cried out, I submit! The lights went dark, and the recording resumed, the sound elevated to drown out Gaval's whimpers of agony. The drone tracks the human woman as she rampages through a trench, engaging in hand-to-hand combat, before zooming out and displaying the entire platoon's movements and calculating the overall kills as, one by one, the platoon's markers wink out as they die. This single, entirely female unit of Terran drop. Marines inflicted a casualty rate of 35,000% from landing until unit termination. These 13 Terran Marines killed 4,550 Yondari, and 2 of the Marines survived. Carter was walking with the medics lifting Gaval out of the theater. Cadet Carter, who was that Marine we saw get her helmet blown off? The educator asked. My grandmother, Carter said without looking back. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.